of us have messed up with our words. But how important they are. How important they are. You know, let me pull this up. If we look in the Bible, I couldn't begin to tell you the number of verses, the number of texts that are out there that speak to the power of words. The power of words and the power of our tongue. In Proverbs 18 and 21, King Solomon, I just put a few of the, I put the highlighted verses there, but in Proverbs 18 and 21, King Solomon speaks to the fact that the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Over in James chapter 3, reading beginning in chapter 3, verses 5 through 8, James says, "The tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person and sets the whole course of his life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell." You know, there are numerous examples about the dangers that our tongue and our words can get us into, and how much trouble this small part of our body can cause. But clearly, there are numerous examples of the good that words can do. By contrast, we learned of good words that uplifted a trembling woman trapped in the eye of an immoral storm in the book of John, where Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Good words reassured an apprehensive apostle when Jesus said in John chapter 14, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you." Good words praised a child sitting in the lap of our Lord, when Jesus said in Matthew chapter 18, "Whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Good words comforted Apostle Paul as he battled a bitter thorn in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, when Jesus told Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you." And so, bad words, dangerous words, good words. In our own lives, we've seen and we know good and bad. We've seen, we've been a part of speaking words or hearing words, both good and bad. You know, words, boy, what power. Make you laugh, make you cry. And you're crying. It seems like the older I get, the easier I cry. I'll cry at car commercial. And heaven forbid one of those public supermarket commercials comes on. I have to get a box of tissues. I don't know what's happening to me. I'm getting old, I guess. But words make you laugh, make you cry, make you smile, make you sad. They can worry you, they can trouble you. But they can also be, when you hear some words, we got the word, as Russ mentioned this week, my sister had a new baby, and boy, what a great thing to hear that everything is okay. And then we've also been on the other side of that, when you've learned of a loved one that's sick or has passed away or some tragedies happened, and just the swing of emotion that words can create. I was recently at a meeting, and you know how they'll have the icebreaker type questions where somebody will throw out a question and you'll respond, and it's designed to give you some way to get to know that person a little better. Well, the question sort of caught me off guard with this icebreaker, and it was this. It was, tell us the first memory that you have where something genuinely scared you or frightened you. Well, there was a lady that spoke first, a little older than me. And the first thing she remembered as she told this group was that she remembered as a child hearing her mama and daddy constantly talking about Russia and the threat of war. And how, even to this day, just hearing Russia brings her to that moment. And how that one word triggered something in her mind, and she lived her childhood and early days frightened after hearing the words and talk about Russia. When it became my turn to speak, I don't know why, just this is what came to my mind. When I was young, my grandparents lived in Spruce Pine, Alabama. Now, if you know where that is, please raise your hand. All right, I'm impressed. Spruce Pine, for those that don't know, is a suburb of Russellville. It's a little bedroom community of Russellville.
It's a dirt road at Russellville.
Yeah, that's right. It's really just a dirt road out that way. But out in Spruce Pine, where my grandparents lived, they heated the bulk of the house with a big gas heater. And it sat right in the middle of the den where we watched TV. And the thing would come on automatically. It would all of a sudden it would just light up and the heat would come on and it would go off. But every now and then it would make this noise. Whenever it made this noise, my grandmother and grandfather would come running. And they would say that it was gas was escaping from that heater and the igniter wasn't coming on right. And if they didn't get over there and light it with a match or something, the whole house going to blow up. Now, this is elementary school, okay? Well, I still don't like gas heaters. And I can remember that thing making that noise. And if they weren't around, I'd go get them real quick, or I wouldn't even be in the house. I didn't want to be in there around that heater. I didn't want anything to do with that heater. So hearing those words impacted me greatly and still do. So let's look at this. You know, those examples I gave, I guess Russia was a real threat. I guess the gas heater thing was probably a real threat. But sometimes, as I heard other people talk about their fears, I began to realize the things that scared them. I began to realize that, you know, they really weren't real. They were more perceived than real. You know, sometimes we get so caught up in things that we think are frightening or that may happen or that may bother us. We get hung up on perceived things more so than real things. And so I think it's a good question to ask yourselves and me. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? And what do you do about it? Because I don't care if you're in your 30s or 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, or above. We've all got fears. We all have things that worry us, that trouble us. And so what do you do about it? You know, there were many Israelites. They were terrified of Goliath. He was probably a real threat. David wasn't. Why? Many of Jesus' followers, they were scared. They were terrified as Jesus was being persecuted. Certainly as Jesus hung on the cross and later. They were terrified because it appeared that Jesus was defeated and that hope was lost. But as we know, Jesus was far from defeated, and hope was found. So their fear, although it may have seemed real to them, was very much perceived because of Jesus' resurrection. Now, I want to look at a few texts from the Bible. I don't know if you want to follow along, you're welcome to. I'll look first at Matthew. And in Matthew chapter 14, in Matthew 14, this is the time frame of this. Jesus is this is right shortly after he's fed the 5,000 with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he's being followed everywhere he goes. He speaks, and he's being followed by hordes of people. And picking up in Matthew 14, beginning in verse 22, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Take courage, don't be afraid. Over in Mark, in Mark 5, I'm not going to read this entire text, but in Mark 5 we learn of a Jewish synagogue ruler named Jairus. You probably know Jewish synagogue rulers during this time were very powerful men. And during this time frame, he had a daughter that was very ill. And the text beginning again in Mark 5 around verse 21, he does everything he can, Jairus does everything that he possibly can to get to Jesus. And he does. He gets to Jesus. He falls at his feet and he begs. He begs Jesus to come and heal his daughter. Picking up in verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." Now, over in John chapter 21. The text here, this is a time frame after Peter has, of course, denied Jesus 3 times before his crucifixion. Jesus has already been put in the tomb. He has already resurrected. He has actually already appeared to the disciples behind the locked doors, and specifically to Thomas. And then we pick up in John 21. If I can get there. There we go. Beginning in verse 7 and 8. Or actually beginning in chapter 21, the first few verses there. Some of his disciples, some of the apostles, decided to go fishing. And they were out fishing offshore. And Jesus actually appears on the shore. And if you remember the text, you remember the story, Jesus calls out to them and says, "Hey, do you have any fish?" And they said, "No." And he says, "Cast your nets on the right side and you'll find fish." And sure enough, they did, and the nets were just full of fish. Well, according to the text, they're decent ways offshore, and most of the men didn't really know who that was. It was yelling at them. Again, this is after Jesus has risen from the dead. But picking up in verse 7 and 8, it says, "Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, 'It is the Lord.' As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, 'It is the Lord,' he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. So think about this now. Peter hears, "It is the Lord." And he jumps. He leaves his friends. He leaves the security of the boat. He leaves the known safety and security of the boat. He leaves that for the unknown of the water. And 100 yards swim in an ocean. A big body of water. I got to get to the shore. I got to get to Jesus. He was not afraid. He was not afraid. He ran in water toward Jesus. And so, as I said earlier, we all face challenges. We all hear words that disturb us, that scare us, that make us happy. But I guess my overriding question today, for myself, for my family, and for all of us, is, what is it that you're afraid of? What is it that worries you? Is it real? Or is it perceived? Is it something that you can control? You alone can control? Or is it not? It may be health, maybe your children, maybe your marriage, maybe your job, maybe the future. What is it? Whatever it is, whatever it might be, when we face it, and believe me, I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to you. When we face it, why don't we do what Matthew did when he heard these words? Take courage and don't be afraid. Because God was with him. As we saw in Mark, why don't we not be afraid and we just believe? Because God is with us. And can we have, and why don't we have the courage to jump to jump like Peter did. To jump toward Jesus. And to jump into the Word of God. I appreciate y'all listening to me this morning. Thank you.